Tonight, one of Europe's biggest ever blackouts. Chaos on the streets as millions across Spain, Portugal and even France are hit by a huge power outage.
I just need to not get a lot of sleep.
Well, I think we've just lost a bit of sound there.
Flights grounded, trains cancelled and even the tennis called off at the Open in Madrid. We'll be live there where a state of emergency has been declared. And we'll explore how such a big outage could happen and what the cause tells us about the state of our infrastructure. Also tonight. Israel accused of starving, killing and displacing as the UN's top court begins a week-long hearing into the treatment of people in Gaza. We'll be live inside Canada's parliament as voters head to the polls in an election overshadowed by the country's neighbour. Plus, another short ceasefire announced by Vladimir Putin, but are we really any closer to a lasting peace? That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. It's not every day millions of people in Europe's fourth biggest country are completely cut off, but that was, and for some still is, the reality tonight across large parts of Spain and Portugal. Lights out, traffic signals off, trains halted and flights cancelled. In Lisbon, the city's metro came to a complete standstill, leaving passengers waiting in darkness. And in Madrid, chaos and confusion on the streets where a state of emergency has now been declared. The impact was felt from Barcelona to Bilbao. At its worst, authorities warned people not to leave their homes and only use their cars unless absolutely necessary. In a moment, we'll unpick the likely cause of the blackout, a so-called rare atmospheric phenomenon. But first, our correspondent Amelia Harper reports.
At a roundabout in the Spanish capital, cars line the roads, crossing at all angles, the traffic lights without power. And it's a similar story in the Portuguese capital of Lisbon. The cause, a major power outage across the two countries. Causing chaos for travellers, these rail passengers stranded in Valencia. Some even walking along the railway lines. Many without any information anywhere across the country.
I'm very cut off at the moment. I'm on the 13th floor and getting very little information other than what little I can see through the Spanish web pages, because as well as obviously losing Wi-Fi, the cellular network, I don't know how well you can hear me at the moment, but the cellular network has been very sketchy.
And across Spain, queues for buses like these travellers in Barcelona, told not to drive unless it's necessary.
State security forces have increased their presence and vigilance on the streets and roads, but for the moment, no civil protection has been observed. As for railway traffic, it has stopped, as you know, for the safety of passengers.
There's been a similar clampdown on travel in Portugal too. The barriers to their underground stations closed. The last passengers inside recording this. An empty station, apart from a few needing torchlight. A different scene to Lisbon Airport, where hundreds of passengers wait for delayed flights. Planes at major airports in both Portugal and Spain delayed. Also delayed play at the Madrid Open. Empty courts at the annual clay tournament when scoreboards and match cameras lost power.
I didn't sleep that well last night, so maybe I just need to not get a lot of sleep.
Well, I think we've just lost a bit of sound there.
The dropout blamed on Spain's electricity grid. Portuguese grid officials say due to extreme temperature variations in the interior of Spain, there were anomalous oscillations in the very high voltage lines, a phenomenon known as induced atmospheric vibration. It is estimated that full normalisation of the network could take up to a week. With Spain yet to respond to the claim, both countries are working to restore power. A day of chaos could turn into many. Amelia Harper, Sky News.
OK, let's go straight to our correspondent, Ashna Haranag, who joins us live from Madrid. And Ashna, I mean, you were probably one of the few flights that managed to get into Madrid today. It's been utterly chaotic and shambolic there for thousands, tens of thousands of travellers, but millions of people across the two countries.
It feels very chaotic and it feels very frantic, Yalda. We're coming live to you now off a small, very tiny fraction of 4G that we've managed to find within a very tiny segment of Madrid airport. And it does feel, as I say, very chaotic. I'm just standing outside departures. Inside, you can see hundreds and hundreds of people clutching their luggage, clutching their passports and clutching their phones, desperate to get any form of signal, any form of information. Crucially, there are queues wherever you look. There are queues from the taxis, queues from the staff desk, queues for the information desk. There is such a lack of information, but such a desperation in the air too. It gives you a sense of how reliant we are on having any sort of connectivity. When it comes to electricity, there is an announcement that goes off every few minutes here at the airport that talks about the fact that we're running on emergency contingency generators. That tells you all you need to know, that air traffic control allowed us to land today on one of the very few flights landing into Madrid because of those emergency generators. Of course, they're only going to have a very short shelf life. It's why the number of flights that are allowed to go in and out today are being rationed. This disruption began at lunchtime and it's going on for hours now, and there are still people arriving, even though they may have been told from their airlines not to come to the airport. Some of them are just desperate to any form of information to try and get back to special occasions, get home, get across the world. There was one woman on our flight who was trying to get across the United States. This was the closest she was able to get. Her flight connection had been cancelled. But things like the baggage handlers, that's all running off the emergency contingency generators, as I talk about. It's not only those generators that are running Madrid airport, but we understand Barcelona airport is also being run off a very similar system. Also, flights we know in Lisbon, in Porto are being affected, and that's just the airports. You saw in that piece there how across the entire nation, infrastructure from fuel stations to card payments used in restaurants to shops to the entire metro network, train network has completely been shut down. One country severely affected by the infrastructure going down here in Spain because of its infrastructure, but another, Portugal, reliant on Spain's infrastructure, also affected in such a way.
Ashna, thank you so much for bringing us up to date with the little power that you've managed to get and the connection that you have. Thanks so much. That's our correspondent, Ashna Haranag, reporting there live from Madrid and giving us a sense of the vulnerability that these countries feel and how dependent they are on these grids. So how can something like this even happen, and what is a rare atmospheric phenomenon? Well, this gives you the scale of the impact. Madrid, Barcelona, Valencia, Seville, Bilbao and Lisbon are among the cities to be hit by this major power outage. Well, let's go straight to our Science and Technology editor, Tom Clark, who joins me now. And Tom, I guess so many people are asking, and you're probably being asked this question, I mean, what exactly is this rare atmospheric phenomenon?
Well, I think the best and most honest answer right now, Yalda, is we don't really know. It's unclear. Induced atmospheric vibration is what was the line that was put out by the Portuguese power grid provider. Again, as Amelia was mentioning in her report, that's something that hasn't been confirmed by the Spanish, and they suggested it was Spain's overhead power lines that were affected by this phenomenon. Big changes in temperature, extreme weather can definitely affect grids. So can solar storms. Geomagnetic events can impact grids. There was quite a big difference between nighttime temperatures and daytime temperatures. It was quite cold overnight and really quite warm today across much of Spain, but not beyond the realms of what grids normally deal with. The phenomenon that electrical engineers have been trying to describe is one that could set up a variation in the conductivity of the power lines, leading to problems with frequencies in those power lines that can affect that. But it's unlikely a single event like that would have precipitated such a catastrophic loss of power. So the chart you're looking at now, that's energy demand from the Spanish electricity grid. And you can see at about 12:30 today when the power outage happened, that dropped by more than half. So that suggests about half the entire grid of the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal, Spain and that part of southern France went offline. It's being restored now. You can see it's picked up. That data's up to about 6:15 this evening. I looked at it just a minute ago. It's come back up quite a bit more, but it's still very well below the demand that there would be at this sort of peak time in the evening as people come home from work, what would have been work if they hadn't had a power outage all day. So they've still got a lot of work to do to get that power up and running.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. And I was just talking to Ashna there about, just how vulnerable, many countries are. What does this say about our infrastructure as a whole?
Well, it tells us, I think, first of all, how we don't really notice how brilliant it's working until it's not. But it does raise very important questions. And I think it's important to remember only last week, the EU Commission President and world leaders came to London for an energy security summit to talk about how we maintain our energy security with threats like Russia targeting Ukrainian energy systems and threatening to go beyond, the vulnerability of these systems as we switch to more renewable power. And this is a very clear example of why we're so worried about that, because it can have catastrophic society-wide impacts. The questions really here will be not just what precipitated this, but what made it impossible for grid engineers to respond and rebalance the system to the point where it looks like we had parts of the grid trip one after the other. Questions will be looking around how much renewable electricity Spain had on its grid at the time. About 60% of its power was coming from solar generation, not very much gas. It's the sort of thing you need in a power outage to bring back online. Whether that was a cause, we don't yet know, but there'll be lots of questions to ask about how we maintain resilience as we massively overhaul our grid towards cleaner energy. And you'll remember that only very recently, Heathrow Airport was taken out by a sort of entirely predictable, once a rare event, but wasn't able to recover. So lots of reminders, this isn't something we can take for granted and we're very reliant on.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, thank you so much. Well, let's speak now to Bruno Gonçalves, a Portuguese member of the European Parliament and committee member on industry, research and energy. Thank you, Mr. Gonçalves, for joining us here on the programme. We're just talking about the fact that, we are so dependent on these systems and we don't realise how much so until they're gone and how well they actually function until something like this happens. You yourself caught one of the last flights out of Porto today and managed to get to Brussels. But did you get a sense that something like this was about to happen, or were you given any indication on your flight over?
First of all, good evening. Well, not so good in Portugal, of course, but we were already experiencing this phenomenon when I landed or when I departed from Porto. So this was not new to me. But what we need to speak about, and very clearly, I think it has already been addressed from some of the authorities, are two issues related to this phenomenon. First, it is how interconnected our grids are. The grids in Portugal are completely interconnected, completely synchronized with Spanish grids. Let's put it like this. And that means that whenever there is a dysfunction in terms of the frequency of the waves in Spain, imagine that there is a disruption in terms of production of electricity in Spain, that means that will impact severely the grids in Portugal. Unnecessarily, that does not mean that we are dependent on the energy coming from Spain. It only means that the grids are connected. And what happened today was precisely that. So there was a major disruption on the Spanish side. I don't want to speculate in terms of what could have been the origin of this disruption. I think it has been already well summarized by the prior speaker. But what happened with this case is that the disruption in terms of the frequency was so high that power supply and demand on the Portuguese side was not matched, meaning that the Portuguese consumers today did not have energy. And still, I mean, I'm having reports that energy is back in Portugal, at least in the metropolitan area of Lisbon and Porto over the last minutes. But this might take more than a couple of minutes, more than a couple of hours to normalize. If any other disruption happens, it might mean that we will have new total blackouts during the late night. And this is what the grids are trying to avoid.
Can I just pick you up on that? Because while authorities are trying to quickly move to normalise this and get everything back, is there concern that actually this could happen again?
Well, of course, there is that concern. I think we won't have a major disruption as we have had during this morning. The case now is a bit different. So right now, we need to be sure that there is an adjustment between the power supply and the power demand in Portugal and in Spain. And why is this? As I've said, our grids are completely interconnected, meaning that they are synchronized. If there is a disruption again in Portugal or in Spain, it might affect any of the countries. Well, and while it is the case that if a major disruption in Spain will affect the grid in Portugal, it is not necessarily the opposite, because the consumption is obviously different in terms of size. But I think that also at European level, we have been working on this, and this has been one of the challenges that we have been trying to meet also at European Parliament. One of the problems.
Yes, if I can just interrupt, because while cyber threats and a cyber attack has been ruled out, I mean, you know, is the EU prepared in case something like that does happen? I mean, we've seen how vulnerable Ukraine was even before the full-scale invasion to cyber attacks and cyber threats.
Yeah,
and I know, and I want to note that it's been ruled out in this particular case.
Yeah, I don't think that is the case. I wouldn't think that would be the case in the Iberian Peninsula. The case is actually quite simple, even though it's obviously not only boring, but it has been catastrophic in terms of the implications that it has had during the day. And the simplification of the matter is that we need to invest more in terms of European investment in the interconnection of the grids, so that whenever there is a disruption in Portugal or in Spain, it doesn't mean a total blackout, but it means that the rest of the system, the rest of the European electricity market, can meet that demand, or can meet that the demand from consumers, and obviously not imply a total disruption of the system. But there are simple things that we can do at this moment, and one of those for the short term is on the one hand to have more storage in terms of batteries, and on the other hand to have direct current links for partial decoupling. That would have avoided today, for example, a major disruption in Portugal, for example, and would avoid surely
future potential disruptions as well. Bruno Gonçalves, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you.
Let's go to Canada now, where the country's heading to the polls. It's an election overshadowed by, of course, Donald Trump, who unleashed tariffs and openly admits he wants to make the country America's 51st state. That, of course, hasn't gone down well. Polls are showing a tight race between the ruling Liberals and opposition Conservatives. So who are their leaders? Let's just talk you through them. You may, of course, be familiar with Mark Carney. He's the incumbent Prime Minister and only been in the job since Justin Trudeau stepped down in March. He headed up the Bank of Canada during the 2008 financial crash, and then the Bank of England during Brexit, and is often celebrated for his financial prowess. Carney has also taken a firm stance against Donald Trump, promising retaliation against steep US tariffs. But he has never been elected to public office. This general election will be his first. Heading up the opposition is Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. He's promised Canada a small government and low taxes, insisting money is better spent by consumers and investors than politicians. He's been compared to Donald Trump and criticised for his populist policies. But he's recently distanced himself from the US president, promising to put Canada first. And despite his young age of 45, Poilievre has been in Canadian politics for 2 decades. He was first elected to the House of Commons at just 25. Well, let's cross to Ottawa and speak to our James Matthews, who is inside Canada's Parliament. James, really good to see you. This is an incredibly tight race, and both leaders in many ways have admitted that Donald Trump has been somewhat of a gift in all of this.
That's right, yeah, Yalda. Both leaders, both the two main contenders, falling over each other to put distance between themselves and Donald Trump, because he looms large over this contest, a real key figure of influence, not somebody that Canadians are necessarily enamoured with, and that's had a big impact on the vote here. I am as you say, in the echoey surroundings of this grand building, built in 1859, the Parliament Estate. This is the foyer, the press gallery, just outside Canada's House of Commons, which are through these double doors between the flags, not in session now currently, but history is looking down upon us as you take a glance around at some of the figures who have held the highest office in this country. Sir Wilfrid Laurier there, the 7th Prime Minister of Canada, Louis Saint Laurent, and to his left, William Mackenzie King, and then beyond him, beyond the double doors and the Canadian flags, Sir Robert Borden to your left. The question is, who will be Prime Minister number 25? Carney right now, the sitting Prime Minister, is the 24th Prime Minister. Will he continue in the job? Well, he is ahead in the polls, although, as you say, Yalda, they have been tightening of late. To hear Canada's heartbeat, go to the hockey. Canada's anthem is sung with feeling these days.
Oh, Canada, we stand.
They're feeling different about their neighbour over the border.
Zoni steals it. Cross, Rick, they score! Riders, Holly!
I don't know if we're at a crisis yet, but it's definitely concerning because we've had such a great trade relationship.
I'm very reluctant to travel into the U.S. right now because I'm afraid that they're going to read my Instagram.
Even before polling day, a quarter of voting-age Canadians had cast an advance ballot. Donald Trump has sharpened the political appetite here. He's also upset the odds in favour of one contender.
We got the 18.
Mark Carney is the former Bank of England governor. Brexit hardened. Styling himself the anti-Trump candidate, has revived his Liberal Party and made him election favourite.
Bonjour tout le monde.
What makes you think you can influence how he interacts with Canada? And at the risk of taking you back to a dark place, what lessons of Brexit will you apply?
Well, I think the lessons of Brexit are beginning to be applied to the United States. When you break off or substantially rupture trade relationships with your major trading partners, Canada included, most important trading partner of the United States, you end up with slower growth, higher inflation, higher interest rates.
Pierre Poilievre is the Conservative contender who was 25 points ahead.
I want you to have hope because change is on the way.
Change for him came when Donald Trump was elected. Most Canadians live within 100 miles of the US border, like in Niagara Falls. People interconnected, now negotiating a bridge over troubled water.
These were fired from American ships as we're at war.
Heavy.
Yeah, heavy, right?
Niagara's mayor displays the relics of war in his office. The politics of Trump weigh heavy too.
When he started weighing in on our election and calling us the 51st state and that our prime minister would be a great governor of one of their states, and we just thought that we've already dealt with this 200 years ago. That's behind us. We have no intention of joining. We want to be great partners and great friends.
There is a range of issues in this Canadian election, no doubt. The economy, the cost of living, crime, a housing crisis. But there's no doubt that Donald Trump effect is front and centre. Politics now is a contact sport. And they've changed the rules of engagement. Hi, Yalda. I want to show you a graph which reflects the astonishing turnaround there has been in political fortunes here for the Liberal Party, principally, Mark Carney's party. Take a look at this graph and take a look at the red line. It almost goes vertically up from the turn of the year when Justin Trudeau stepped down, an unpopular Prime Minister. This country at large had had enough of a Liberal government and Prime Minister who had been in power for close to a decade. But of course, that turn in fortunes turns on the election of Donald Trump, and Donald Trump talking about tariffs, talking about annexing Canada, turning it into the 51st state. Mark Carney, the former Bank of England governor, he has styled himself as the anti-Trump against an opponent who many style as the mini-Trump, Pierre Poilievre, if I can pronounce that name correctly. He's more ideologically aligned towards Donald Trump, and that has switched off many of the Canadian electorate. I was out at some of the polling stations today, and you know, Yalda, it's remarkable. You mentioned the word Trump, and everybody has a thought and everybody has an answer on that particular subject.
We know he's very interested in acquiring resources. We are an extremely vast country that is fluent in so many different things that he wants. Do you need to take him seriously? Yeah, because he's already proving that he writes his own rules.
I feel that the financial implications in Canada are going to be obviously something to be dealt with regards to trade, tariffs, the U.S. currency, all of the things that happen as a result of the trade war, not necessarily the trade war itself.
This wouldn't have changed how I vote, but I am more confident than, say, having an adult in the room like Mr. Carney is our best option when dealing with the United States.
And you know, Donald Trump couldn't help himself but enter the fray here in Canada today, putting on Truth Social, telling Canadians to vote for the person who will make this country the 51st state. Pierre Poilievre, who's been damaged by Trump, he posted on X, Canada will never be the 51st state. Both candidates trying to put distance between themselves and Donald Trump. The question for that Conservative candidate, has he left it too late?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, extraordinary that we're in a place now where the main talking point in the Canadian elections is the President of the United States. James, thanks so much. And we'll bring you the election results live on Sky News as polls close from midnight tonight. You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Still to come on the programme. President Putin announces a 3-day ceasefire in Ukraine. We'll ask if it can really lead to a lasting peace.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation futures.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back to the programme. It's safe to say any word of a ceasefire in Ukraine at the moment is taken with a pinch of salt. Vladimir Putin today announced a 3-day halt to hostilities to coincide with the 80th anniversary of the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany. The Kremlin insists it's still open to a more permanent arrangement, but as Michael Clark explains, it's the diplomatic battle that's preventing peace.
President Putin sprung a bit of a surprise today when he announced unilaterally a 72-hour, 3-day pause in the fighting that would span the 9th of May, which is Victory Day in Russia, a very important day symbolically, the Victory in Europe Day for Russia. May the 8th is the Victory in Europe Day for the rest of us. And in doing that, he's offering far less than the Americans will have wanted. The United States was very keen to get an all-out ceasefire indefinitely so that talking could start. And this is rather less than that. It offers the Americans something, not this week when the Americans wanted it, but next week, 72 hours, you just unilaterally announced. And it's far less, of course, than the Ukrainians offered almost 7 weeks ago now when they said a complete unconditional ceasefire, ground, sea and air, from now on, and then we'll talk. So it's less than the Ukrainians offered, far less than the Americans wanted immediately. But presumably, the calculation that Putin is making is that it will be enough to keep the Americans involved, keep the Americans along with the narrative that the Russians have been able to create so far, that this war is all about deeper issues, not just Ukraine, and those deeper issues have got to be addressed, and that Zelensky is the problem, not Zelensky is the victim. I think that's where we are with that. But why now? Why is this particular moment so important? I think it goes back to this meeting in the Vatican. Here we are in St. Peter's Basilica. And the two leaders, Trump and Zelensky, sat together for a quarter of an hour. As diplomatic meetings go, this is about as intimate as it gets. Diplomatic leaders never normally get this close to each other or speak as intimately as they seem to have spoken together. What they said, we don't really know, but undoubtedly, President Zelensky was able to convince President Trump at least of the game that he believes that the Russians are playing. And after this meeting, Trump was visibly more irritated with Putin and has issued a couple of very strong, so far only rhetorical, but strong denunciations of Putin's apparent desire to keep the war going. And so this meeting, I don't think it will change American policy, but it may well have affected the way American policy is carried out. And for America, this is a really important week. For the United States, this is the 100-day anniversary in a couple of days' time of President Trump's acquisition of power, and that really matters to him, to have something important and big to announce, not just a 3-day ceasefire next week, announced unilaterally by the Russians. Meanwhile, the war goes on, and of course, as the war goes on, so overnight there were strikes, deep strikes, both from Ukraine against Russia and Russia against Ukraine. That doesn't change. But interestingly, the Russians now say that Kursk, the little area of offensive that goes back to last August, that Kursk has been fully regained and that the Ukrainians have been totally pushed out of Kursk. And as a result of that, both the Russians and the North Koreans are now admitting what they've previously been lying about all the time since last August, which is that North Korean troops really are involved in Kursk. about 12 or 13,000 of them. We're fairly sure that at least 4,000 of them have become casualties, and so they've paid a heavy price for it. But both the North Koreans are now lauding the gallantry of their men, and the Russians. Even the Russian General Staff, Gerasimov, has made an announcement today saying that they acknowledge the valuable work that has been done in the partnership between North Korea and Russia. So having lied about it to the whole world since August, they now admit, yes, we've been doing it, and yes, we're very proud of it. That's an example, I suppose, of this sort of black and white Orwellian truth and falsity that goes along with this war day after day.
That was Professor Michael Clark there. Well, let's go back to Canada now, where, of course, as we've been reporting, people are still heading to the polls to make a decision. And let's bring in Ian Austin, the New York Times Canada correspondent. Ian, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. We're just speaking to our correspondent, James Matthews, who's also in Ottawa at the moment. And he said, everywhere you go right now, everyone has an opinion on Donald Trump. It seems very much like this election has been overshadowed by Canada's neighbour.
Yes, I'm sitting in a little village very close to the U.S. border, and all anybody wants to talk about is the American president right
Looks like we've lost Ian. We seem to be having some technical issues there. We will try and get him back if we can. But you're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Lots coming up on the programme, including starving, killing and displacing. We'll have the latest from The Hague, where Israel has been accused of using aid as a weapon of war in Gaza. Stay with us for that.
show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine?
American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
We're going to talk about Gaza now. Starving, killing and displacing. Those were the accusations brought against Israel today as the International Court of Justice opened its week-long hearing. The case is all about aid and whether Israel has broken international law by blocking supplies from reaching Gaza. It comes as aid agencies, including the World Food Programme, have warned their stocks are completely empty. Israel has denied any wrongdoing. Our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle reports.
Israel has prevented aid from entering Gaza since the beginning of March to put pressure on Hamas to release the remaining 59 hostages. Hundreds of Palestinians are now queuing every day for what limited rations they can get. The UN World Food Programme says they no longer have any hot meals to distribute, but Israel denies that Gaza is running short on food. The blockade is the longest Gaza has ever faced, and international governments, including the UK, France and Germany, have criticised the Israeli tactic. Today, at the International Court of Justice in The Hague, 38 countries began a legal challenge.
It is not about the number of aid trucks Israel is or is not allowing into the occupied Palestinian territory, especially Gaza. It is about Israel destroying the fundamentals of life in Palestine while it blocks UN and other humanitarians from providing life-saving aid to the population. It is about Israel unraveling fundamental principles of international law, including their obligations under the UN Charter.
Israel is not giving evidence in person at the ICJ, but the country's foreign minister held a press conference in Jerusalem to argue its case.
This case is part of a systematic persecution and delegitimization of Israel. It is abusing the international legal system and politicizing it. No country, democracy or non-democracy, has been brought before the court as much and as often as Israel. No country is subject to such double standards.
Israel has stopped cooperating with the UN Agency for Palestinians, UNRWA, in East Jerusalem, the West Bank and Gaza, accusing the agency of having ties to Hamas. UNRWA denies that.
When there is a political will, there is a way, and we must go back to that situation in January. We're having children being killed every single day. We're having aid workers being killed just this weekend. Another 2 of our colleagues at UNRWA were killed. We're nearing 300 of our staff killed only since the war began. This must come to an end.
The UN says that Gaza is also facing a dramatic shortage of fuel and medical supplies. The hearings at The Hague will last 5 days, but a judgment could take months to reach. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
Well, joining me now is Luis Moreno Ocampo, who served as the first prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. So this is essentially about the law and whether Israel has been abiding by international law. Is it not?
The real issue today is exactly about that. It is about what we can do when the police attack us. What we can do when the authorities, in this case, a government, is attacking people, ignoring the law. That's the challenge of today, because today what's happening was started a hearing at the International Court of Justice, which is the UN court solving conflict between states. And interestingly, the International Court of Justice is not joined by Arab people. It's joined by 15 countries, including Americans, British, French, all the Western countries are there. So the judges are not anti-Israel. And the request to make a decision was not adopted by one country who hates Israel. It was adopted by the UN General Assembly. So this is the entire goal to asking the court, please remind us what are the rules here. And it was interesting because the first speaker was the UN legal advisor, and she's Eileen Hamakior, and she's the granddaughter of the second UN Secretary General, Hamakior, who died in a plane crash when he was trying to get a ceasefire in Congo conflict in 1961. So his granddaughter is now following the path, asking in the name of UN that the court should clarify to Israel its duties and obligations to respect the civilians, to respect the UN members. She affirmed that more than 100 people were killed, UN people were killed. And in addition to that, she mentioned specifically that the Israel parliament is adopting laws as if they were the owner of East Jerusalem. And this is, she presented as a way to take land by force. In some sense, similar to what Russia is doing in Ukraine. So what we are watching today, maybe it's difficult to the media to present, but it's a battle for civilization. It's a world trying to say, some leaders, the law should be respected.
Yes, and Israel is not present there, but they have sent a dossier, a document. Will the judges spend the week assessing the evidence that they have and the evidence that has been built up, as well as Israel's dossier? What will be the process throughout the week? Because obviously Israel pushes back and says, you know, that there is no issue around aid, and all the aid agencies that have been operating in Gaza say that we have no access to aid.
Well, this is an advisory opinion. That is why Israel is not there. No one is, Israel has no right. So when South Africa presented a similar case to Israel, Israel was present. In this case, Israel is not present because it cannot be present. The court will make a decision, it's not mandatory. So that's why it's a part of the battle for civilization. But today, at the same time, a different court, the International Criminal Court Appeal Chamber, ruled that should be a decision on the jurisdiction of Israel in the case against Netanyahu and Gallant. So there are two different courts at The Hague working the subject. But for me, whatever happened with the procedure, the judges will decide how far and how quick they move. What is incredible is there are 52 million civilians in Gaza with no food and no water. The world knows that, and we are not unable to do something on that.
Yes, and I think the other issue here is, as you say, it's about whether the law, international law, is being abided by, but also this week-long process draws attention to the fact that, you know, dozens of people continue on a daily basis to be killed in Gaza.
Well, but don't blame the court. It's not the court the problem.
No, of course not. I'm saying that the court itself, the proceedings, will also draw attention to the reality on the ground at the moment.
Well, but it's a huge hypocrisy because everyone knows what happened. Come on. You made all the media showing this effort for the last 1.5 years. The ICJ made rulings on the South Africa case against Israel. It was a different case, Nicaragua against Germany, and the issues were debated, including this attack on the UN refugee. Germany started to finance again the UN Refugee Agency. So there are many rulings. The United States, some of them are protected. Israelis are trying to keep doing. For me, the fact that since March, Israel is again blocking food and water is incredible. Because last November, 3 judges of the International Criminal Court issue arrest warrant against Netanyahu, the prime minister, for blocking water and food. So this is already, Prime Minister Netanyahu is already indicted. What else you need? So what else you need? And the countries are hesitant. Germany is thinking how to transform the court, how to change the court. That's the real business. Today, The Guardian informed that some judges are trying to block the prosecutor to make an announcement. So it's a big battle behind the scenes, what's happening. But it's not to stop Israel to commit, to manage these actions. It's trying to stop the courts. And that's why, for me, we are witnessing a fight for civilization. And your report is important to explain to the people what is happening.
Yes, and I mean, it doesn't help that the United States continues to sort of block any of these things and continues to not hold Israel accountable for these actions.
Well, that is interesting because the Biden administration was talking about international law, at the same time blocking any effort to apply international law. Trump administration ignored international law, sanctioned the ICC prosecutor. However, is doing something very interesting. The negotiation with Iran, if it's working, could transform the entire game, could end the Middle East violence, will be probably the end of Netanyahu as prime minister, probably too. So that's why the paradox. The law is pushing. What Trump is doing is not respecting the law, but if he's making this agreement with Iran, that could transform the game.
Mr. Ocampo, really fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for all of your expertise and insights there.
Thank you for the calling.
Well, I'm joined in the studio now by the Palestinian author Karim Katan. Karim, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. We'll get to your book in a moment, but we're just talking there with the former chief prosecutor about the proceedings that are taking place at the ICJ this week and holding Israel accountable for the lack of aid that continues to be prevented from entering Gaza. I can't imagine how difficult it must have been for you to see all of this unfold over the course of the last 17 months.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for pointing this out because, as your guest was saying, I think one of the very difficult things about this is the sheer hypocrisy that surrounds this whole thing. As he said, like, we all know what's been happening in Gaza. Everyone knows. It's live, it's there, it's constantly broadcast. So we have access to the information, and yet nothing fundamentally changes. No sanctions are applied, sanctions that you would expect under international law. International law is not applied as it should be. So there's two things that happen at the same time, both the acts of Israel in Gaza and also in the West Bank. Let's not forget all of what's happening in the West Bank. And at the same time, this sort of, sometimes it's complicity, other times it's just a sort of complacency, which is also enabling Israel to continue its actions in Gaza.
And I think one of the things that was just pointed out was that the Biden administration used to talk about international law and abiding by it and the importance of it, but actually there was a level of hypocrisy there because they wouldn't then put the pressure that was needed on Israel to reverse its actions.
Sure. I think they toed the line by having some sort of, their speech was sort of respected. They pretended that they respected international law, yet their support to Israel, as they always say, is ironclad. So their support to Israel happens regardless of Israel's actions. Now, of course, it's worse under President Trump's mandate. But yeah, of course, there was always this deep-set hypocrisy when it comes to Palestinian lives.
I mean, we see and hear the most horrific things being said and done in Gaza. Are you hopeful for the people of Gaza? I mean, I know it's such a difficult question.
I think, if I'm honest with you, I think I can't say anything here from the comfort of, I'm a Palestinian with a French passport. I can travel, I'm safe, I have access to food. I feel uncomfortable saying something in the stead of the people of Gaza who are being starved and being mass killed. I think we need to be hopeful anyway. We don't have a choice. We need to believe that something gets better at some point. And we need to believe that there's a threshold after which things do get better. But again, I'm saying this from the comfort of where I am right now.
I guess I ask because your work ultimately talks about darkness, but moments of hope as well in the most difficult time, especially for the Palestinian people.
You know, when you're a writer of fiction, especially when you write novels, you do have the luxury of writing texts that are long and that take time, and therefore that accommodate a lot of different feelings and different relationships to the things that are happening, which means that you're not commenting only on the crisis, but you're replacing a crisis within a longer time frame. So in a novel, you can explore darkness and light, hope and despair in ways that you don't have access to when you're in the news, right? Because you're commenting the immediate things that are happening, whereas in novels you have the luxury of time differently.
Yes, and I guess finally I would ask, and in light of what you've just said, and I'm being told actually I have 40 seconds left on the programme, so I'm going to unfortunately have to leave it there. But Karim, we're really grateful that you've joined us here on the programme.
Thank you.
That was author Karim Katan speaking to me there about his work and experience. Well, that's it from me and the team here on the programme. Goodbye for now.